Let's bring up our next speaker, our next keynote. All right. So what's fun for me is I started this community 12 years ago with Modev. There was an agency out of Charlottesville, Virginia. They were amazing. They started coming to our events early on, but now they are a force to be reckoned with. They just made an acquisition. They're growing and growing, and I look forward to this keynote. Let's give it up for Tobias Dengel, the CEO of Willow Tree.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, I know we're behind schedule, so we'll try and catch up a little bit. The format of this is we're going to talk about 15 or 20 minutes about the psychology of voice and what users really want based on our research. Then we're going to have a quick fireside chat with Chris Merrill, who's the Chief Marketing Officer of Synchrony's direct-to-consumer group. And then we're going to do a panel with some industry experts. But this whole hour is about how large companies and large brands, Fortune 500 types of brands, can think about voice and what's really going on. And what's interesting is we hear all these numbers, right? Voice is the fastest adoption of any technology in history. However, for most Fortune 500 companies, most large brands, it hasn't really changed the way we operate in anything like the internet did, in anything like mobile did. Willow Tree is an agency that builds apps, websites, et cetera, for clients. And we always are getting asked by some of the largest companies in the world, HBO, Fox, Regal Cinemas, Synchrony, our clients, what's next? What's after mobile? And these waves, for whatever reason, happen about every 10 years. And there have been a lot of false starts. If you were at CES 6, 7 years ago, it was all about 3D TV. If you were here 3 or 4 years ago, it was all about AR, VR. None of those have really impacted Fortune 500 brands and their relationship with consumers in any kind of massive way. And the question is why? And so ultimately, it's about what are we solving for the human experience with any technology. And we really believe that voice is the next thing. But we also believe that the reason it hasn't happened yet is we're all thinking about voice the wrong way. And just the topic of voice itself is almost the wrong way to think about it, because really you got to dissect it into two things. One is humans speaking to machines, and the other is humans listening to what machines are saying. And those are really two completely different things. And voice, the way we think about it, has somehow combined those things in ways that I don't think work very well for the human experience. And so we believe that over the next year, and I think what was refreshing to us is Google saying the exact same thing, is that we're going to be moving to a multimodal environment, an environment where the app or the website plays a really important role. And what I want to explore today is why that is. So when we as humans start working with a new technology, it's about developing trust and starting to trust that technology. And right now, voice does not have enough consumer trust at the end of the day. We find it very useful for certain things. We find it useful for turning on music in our house, for listening to NPR, for very specific things. But in general, for most Fortune 500 kind of companies, it is not at a point where it's useful to them every day. And the question is why? And to understand that, I think you have to understand what builds up trust, right? And as humans, there are two types of trust: emotional trust and cognitive trust. Emotional trust is what we've built up over tens of thousands of years of evolution, where we judge each other, usually in less than a second, on whether we trust the person that we have just met, right? Cognitive trust gets built over time. In essence, cognitive trust is pretty simple, does this human being or does this device do what it says it's going to do what they say they're going to do? And I think one of the big mistakes that we have made collectively in voice is with these all-encompassing voice assistants is trying to emulate a human experience and get humans to trust that voice, which is basically impossible at this point. Maybe in 50 years, maybe in 100 years, but right now it's impossible. There's a concept of the Uncanny Valley that is old. It came about in the 70s vis-a-vis robotics. But the concept was that until you get almost human-like, you actually go through a phase where we as humans trust things less because they're just too weird. Think about zombies, etc. And so here's an example of that. Whoa. This is supposed to do. All right, it was playing yesterday in the test. All right, anyway, for those of you who know the scene, it is a scene of Will Smith interacting with a humanoid, and it ends up with Will Smith kind of completely disgusted by the experience because it's just too weird. And so if we can't get to that emotional trust, what can we get to? And I think the answer there is we have to hop over and really think about cognitive trust as the primary mechanism by which we engage voice in our devices. And so cognitive trust, again, means, does this thing do what it says it does, and does it make my life easier? So we got to take a step back. Why do we like voice? At the end of the day, it's because it's faster, right? Anything that's 3 times as fast is going to break through in the digital world. We can speak about 3 times as fast as we can type. And for many of us, over 40, it's typing on a mobile device might be closer to 20 words a minute. The problem right now is that the responses we get from Alexa or voice-only experiences are slower than what we're used to when we read, right? And so when you net those two out, right now, voice isn't solving anything as a standalone service in most cases, right? Voice today is about as fast as or slower than an experience of typing and reading. The breakthrough is going to happen when we speak to machines and we can graphically get responses. And so that's where we kind of get to a really useful world in the voice environment. And so hopefully this one plays.
A cheese pizza with bacon, chicken, mushrooms, and olives, a buffalo chicken pizza with onions and peppers, and a veggie pizza with extra cheese.
So this is a real demo. We work a lot in the quick serve restaurant space. And on the left, the brand is obviously blinded. We can show that ordering 3 complex pizzas that we would talk about takes about 10 to 12 seconds. Doing it in the apps, which are, we believe, kind of super user-friendly as they are today, it takes closer to 45 seconds. Now, what you don't want, you lose all this efficiency if you then have to listen to a voice assistant tell you you have ordered a cheese pizza with bacon, with chicken, because you need a confirmation, right, before you pay. And so that's where voice is breaking down today. It is instead going to move, we're going to transmit voice to our devices, and we're going to get a graphic result back, in most cases, for most kind of Fortune 500 companies in terms of how they interact with consumers. And that's already happening. We do it every day, right? Our natural tendency now is when you have to text someone or write an email on a mobile device, you will dictate it, but you don't want to listen to it, you'll read the result. And that is kind of the first phase, the first evolution of this multimodal environment. What's really interesting, and I think what's going to happen as part of this, is hopping through ecosystems. So what we're working on right now is helping clients engage in an experience, let's say on Alexa, but then hopping to your mobile device that's in an Android or iOS environment and being able to hop across those ecosystems, because consumers don't give a crap about those ecosystems, right? They don't give a crap that this is Alexa and my phone is iOS. They want all this stuff to work together. And by using messaging and various authentication approaches, we're able to get there today. In terms of what brands and large companies should be thinking about, and I think Google hit on some of this as well, is what are the 3 phases of voice? Like, what do you have to do to get good at transmitting information to machines? So first of all, you have to recognize what the human being is saying. The good news is, most of us in this room, unless you're Google, Amazon, Microsoft, don't really have to spend a lot of time on that, because they're at 95% efficiency. That's on device. That is not what anyone in this room has to worry about. What you do have to worry about is, what is the meaning of those words, right? So you're going to get words transmitted to you from a device. What do they mean? Scott from Google said today they have measured 3,000 different ways that just for setting an alarm, right? And this is where I think things get really, really exciting for big companies, is most large companies have the data to train the model today. Usually it's IVR data, but they have thousands, millions of interactions with consumers that startups don't have. So what's interesting to us is that this is one of those rare opportunities where established companies with lots and lots of data have a huge advantage over startups that are trying to create this training data from scratch. And so investing in figuring out how to use that data to extract meaning from what humans are asking the device is one important area for investment. The second important area is the UX of response, right? Now in the movie example, you've had someone say, hey, Regal, what movies are playing tonight? You've parsed that, you figured out, all right, that means they mean the local theater, that means tonight means 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., here are the 8 movies. No one wants to listen to an assistant tell you, all right, here are the 8 movies with 3 showtimes each, and then you order a movie. You want to get a visual response, so you get the visual response. How you get that response is this concept of a user experience, voice-related user experience. Sometimes you will want a voice response. Most of the time, we believe you want a graphic response in an app or on a website. And that is where we believe most of the investment should be happening if you're a Fortune 500 company, is figuring out how and under what circumstances we want to deliver those responses based on what it is that we're getting the user and in what situation they're in. We can tell usually if they're driving. We can tell if they're doing X, Y, Z. So getting that right is going to be life or death to these next-gen user experiences. And what we like to think about, and it's funny, I hadn't seen the Google presentation until an hour and a half ago, and when you're going after Google, you're like, well, I hope they're in line with what we're going to say. If they're not, we'll be contrarian, which is cool too. But we were pretty psyched that they were talking about this whole concept of enabling your apps with voice, enabling your website with voice. And we think that is the next thing. Now, you might start on a device. You might start on Alexa. You might start in Google Assistant for certain applications. You might start in Siri. But we think most of the interaction over the next 2 or 3 years is going to be in the app itself. And how's that going to manifest itself? We think Waze is a good example, right? If you use the Waze app, you see this giant mic button. Now, they're doing that because we spend a lot of our time driving, but we think those mic buttons are going to be showing up everywhere. Now, they might be overlaid, as Google showed, through their OS, or it might be directly in the app. But you get 2-3 years down the road, we feel that the main way that consumers and employees are going to be interacting with your digital experiences is by transmitting via voice and then receiving information back via text or graphics. And to talk a little bit more about that, I'd like to bring up Chris Merrill. Chris is the Chief Marketing Officer of Synchrony Financial, and he's focused on their direct-to-consumer business. Synchrony, if you don't know, formerly part of GE Capital. Chris, for a long time, was the CMO of Synchrony Bank, and now has expanded his role to all their direct-to-consumer. Chris, welcome.
Thank you.
So to start out, why don't you tell us a little bit about what Synchrony's up to in digital generally,
Yeah.
and then we can talk about voice.
Yeah. So if you take a step back, for one of our new divisions that I'm a part of and run is direct to consumer, and everything about it is digital, right? So we've got a digital bank. So we don't have that national footprint with like a brick and mortar as an example. So our only real interaction, especially our first interaction with consumers, is digital. So we care a lot about that digital customer experience, whether you're talking about websites, apps, and how it all works together. And that's really our kind of branch in advertising, if you think about it, right? That's our main interaction. We, of course, have call centers, and you can answer anything by calling in, but really that first and foremost interaction is digital. So customer experience, the UX that you guys talked about, how consumers can easily navigate and get to the answers or what they need to know, is critically important for us.
So how do you think about voice and within the organization, everything that's going on, how does it stack up?
Yeah, I think voice, I mean, look, voice, you've talked about it, Google talked about it. We all know how important voice is. We can talk 3x as fast as we can type. I love the examples of the movies of we hate listening to voice because it's so slow. I think of that Seinfeld episode where, Kramer was listing out all the movies, and it's very comical to think that's where we are right now. Right. And so that clearly doesn't work. When you think about that aspect, but voice is a part of our lives. We have, over 100 million connected devices at home. Over 50% of all Google searches will happen on voice today, this year, versus the typical search. So voice is here to stay. So it's very integral. I think in my space, in financial services, there's additional complexity that you have with voice because of the security concerns. You can imagine saying, on voice, hey, what's my bank account? How much do I have in my bank account? What bills do I have to pay? Well, wait a second. I don't want you telling this room what's in my bank account, and is that secure? So, those are the challenges that I think financial services companies have to work through, and other industries as well that have similar security or risks. But clearly we like voice, and what our approach has been is to really have some basic skills with our app connected right into Google, right into Siri, so that you could say, hey, what's my balance, pay this bill, and really kind of get what's the number one, number two, number three things that most people do in my space in banking. It's check your balance. So let's make that really simple and easy and upfront.
Yeah, I read some data. I think Bain did a study. Over 50% of banking call center inbound calls are still to check the balance.
Yeah.
And what's crazy about that is that it's even higher amongst millennials than it is users over 50, because they think it's faster than picking up the app, authenticating, et cetera, which kind of goes to our whole point about voice. What's hard about voice? What's hard for you to get done? What are the challenges for a large organization, especially in the financial services space?
Yeah, I think there's probably two things that really stand out on voice in financial services. Number one is what we were a little bit, kind of just talking about, which is security. When you, for us, the way that we've done that, if you're going to pay a bill or you're going to do something that is actually talking about your guys' money in your account, we have an additional step, which is typically you got to put in a 4 or 6-digit code to Alexa. So you got to set that up ahead of time. Then you can do, when you talk to Alexa or you talk to Siri, you can say, okay, well, what's your PIN? What's your 4-digit passcode in order to have that transaction? And so the first couple times you actually do that again goes back to the speed thing. It takes longer because now I got additional steps, not only every time I want to do it, but the actual initial setup of linking my voice with my PIN code right to the app. And again, it makes sense on why you have to do that, but we're not quite there where we can actually recognize, oh, this is Chris speaking. I can recognize his voice, therefore I unlock versus someone else. So I think that security is a big thing. And what we see in the financial services space is over 50% of the people that we have surveyed and others have surveyed have said that's their number one concern with voice. Is it secure? How do I know that it's not getting hacked? So I think with any new technology, you always run that. But that's one issue. I think the second thing is the concept that everyone's been talking about today, which is multimodal. I don't want, especially if I'm in any kind of remotely public space, I don't want the voice telling the room what's in my checking balance, how much I owe on my credit card because I had too big of a Christmas splurge. And so I still want to be able to dictate when I'm driving the car to do something, but I don't want it to be read out. So this multimodal, getting it back on saying, okay, you asked for your balance, here it is, the push notification right on your screen. I think that's when really you're going to start seeing much more involvement with voice and really having it all come together.
So if you look 2-3 years down the road, what's the ideal kind of voice relationship between your institution and your end users?
Yeah, I think you'd want, obviously frictionless, right? We talk about that a lot, but you're going to want, I think what's interesting about coming to a place like CES and you see all the different virtual assistants and all the connected devices and how everything can work. I think the world is going to move, and what we want to see, that I want to talk to one person and have all the devices connected. I don't want to have to open up 8 different apps. I don't want to have to know that I have to say, hey, Google, do this. And then remember, Amazon is Alexa and Siri is this and things like that. I want to talk one way, the way that I normally talk, and have all of my accounts interacted so that frictionless is there. And eventually that the system knows that it's Chris speaking. So I don't have to do these multiple steps. And in fact, that's even more secure than some of the security challenges that we have today. So I think once we can figure out and have it really so that this virtual assistant voice merges together, you really get rid of the friction that still is involved in an early voice. I think that's when you're going to see an even more adoption and doing more skills, more transactions. And to the point that we're talking about with banking today, it's the same thing with the app. The majority of people come to check your balance. It's that security thing to say, my money's still there. Probably didn't grow that much from yesterday, but at least it's still there, right? And so, but that's the number one thing people do in banking, right? And banking in itself is the third most used apps in our wallets, right? You've got social media, obviously that takes the cake. Weather is second, banking is third. And so again, I think having that frictionless and using that voice to interact and do my day-to-day banking, and when we can really start combining voice with actually helping me solve my day-to-day problems, can I afford this? Can I do this? That's really when all of a sudden this voice virtual assistant is now someone that you're going to be going to on a regular basis to help you with your financial decisions.
And talk a little bit about the economics, right? It's the consumer value and optimizing for consumer UX is a huge deal. And McKinsey just did a study last year about how important user experience is in any space. We all see it just in our airline apps, right? You to some extent judge an airline by the app, right? Talk a little bit about, so we know that, we've talked about that, but talk a little bit about just the pure dollars and cents if you're able to use voice in an app or in experience versus what happens today. If people want a voice experience, they have to call into the IVR.
Yeah, I mean, so we have, just like most companies, of our size have, we've got our own chatbots as well, virtual assistants, that basically when you chat or call through an IVR can answer your questions without having actual people behind desks responding to chat, right? And our platform is called Sydney. And today so far, it's about 18 months old for us. Over 50% of all inbound calls and inbound chats are answered through this effectively virtual assistant. And so as we get smarter, as the world gets smarter, as we start collecting all this data and using AI technologies, you think about the cost out, and roughly anywhere from $3 to $5 per phone call, per inbound call, because you got to staff it, right? You got to answer all that stuff. Now I can answer that, and it's faster and more convenient for you as users. That's a double win, right? So it's really easy to have those conversations with our finance team about the payback of something, investing in this technology, investing in UX. When you can start talking about, look at all the calls I'm going to take out, look at the tens of millions of dollars I'm going to save from an efficiency perspective, it pays for itself very, very quickly. And we've seen that, right? And again, you start slow. I like the comments that Google and everyone's been saying, because you want to just start. You don't have to say, oh my gosh, I've got to do 8,000 voice things. I got to be in every single home device and connect it. Just start with a couple, 1 or 2 skill sets, get it in there, start learning, start getting some data back, and then you can really go from there.
Yeah, that same Bain study, I think, indicated that it's about a 90% cost savings for financial institutions in general, if they can pull, for every call they can pull out of the IVR and put it into a voice assistant. Great. We've got about 2 or 3 minutes, so I'm going to go a little off script. Does anyone have any questions for Chris before we go into the full panel here? Yes.
Check 1, 2.
You touched on it very briefly, but about individual user accounts. So I have my own interaction with my assistant, and my wife has her set of accounts.
Sure.
How close are we to that, do you think?
so that
the assistant can recognize who it is that's talking and address those security issues.
I'm probably the wrong person to answer that. Maybe Tobias, you can help. I think we're still a ways away. There are companies like we've done some investments in companies like PinDrop that can recognize your voice. I think like anything else, we're using that as like add-on services, not the main aspect that says this is more secure than giving me your 4-digit code that we're so accustomed, or my thumbprint or facial recognition. So there are definitely companies out there that are doing that, and I'm sure we're probably closer to having that technology that can really do that. How quick companies and financial services are to just jump in with that probably is obviously a little bit more of a lag, especially when you're talking about your money and your security. So you'll probably see things like that in non-banking first, would be my guess. But I don't know, Tobias, if you've...
Yeah, I mean, we see that. The authentication piece, especially when you hop across ecosystems, gets pretty complex, right? It's really easy for us to be up here and say, hey, ask Alexa what movies are playing tonight and get a notification. But what happens in the background is pretty complex because your Amazon authentication has to be tied now into your Regal Cinemas authentication. That's doable, but that's another step the end consumer has to go through. And that's obviously an application where security is not quite as much of a concern as it is when it comes to your bank account.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Chris. Awesome.
Perfect. Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you all.
Thank you, Chris.
We'll now pull up.